All right, I see that people are logging on. So, we have a packed program today, so I want to get started. Hi, welcome to the webinar, Ask the Expert on Rare Ovarian Cancers. I'm Maggie Nicholas Alexander, the Ovarian Cancer Program Director at SHARE. Before the presentation begins, I'd like to tell you a little bit about SHARE. SHARE is a nonprofit organization that has been helping people through breast, ovarian, and uterine cancer for the last 45 years by offering the support of those who have been there. SHARE provides many services, including a helpline, support groups, and educational programs. All services are free of charge for participants. For more information, visit our website at sharecancersupport.org. All participants will be muted during the program. Today's program will be entirely Q&A. You are encouraged to submit questions through the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. The chat section will be disabled. When asking questions, remember that the presenter is unable to give specific medical advice, so please keep your questions general in nature. This program is being recorded and will be available on the SHARE website soon. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, who we're so excited to have join us again. Dr. Amanda Nickles Fader is an associate professor in the Johns Hopkins Medicine Department of Gynecology and Obstetrics. Dr. Fader is both the director of the Kelly Gynecologic Oncology Service and the director of the Center for Rare Gynecologic Cancers at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. She is recognized as a leading expert in rare gynecologic tumors, including high-risk uterine and ovarian cancers. Dr. Fader has a special interest in uterine serous carcinoma, low-grade serous carcinoma of the ovary, and uterine sarcomas. She is on the National Cancer Institute NRG Oncology Rare Tumor Committee, and she has published more than 170 peer-reviewed papers in medical journals, including 55 original research papers on ovarian cancer. So you can see why we're so excited to have Dr. Fader join us for this program today. So since this program is entirely Q&A, let's get started. You can continue to submit questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen throughout the program. We'll try to get through as many of the submitted questions as possible, but we may not be able to due to time constraints. So welcome again, Dr. Fader, and let's get to some of these questions.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It's an honor to be back.
Okay, so the first question we're going to get into is whether there are any new treatment options for or promising studies on recurrent MMT.
MMT, great question. So MMT is now also known as carcinosarcoma. And since we're speaking specifically about ovarian carcinosarcoma, yes. So what's interesting about MMTs or carcinosarcomas is they're not really sarcomas. They are what we call epithelial tumors. And the difference between epithelial tumors and sarcomas is that epithelial tumors will develop within the organs or tissues like the skin, any organ in the body, like the lung, the colon, the uterus, the ovaries, whereas sarcomas will develop in muscle. So it can be in a leg muscle. The uterus is a muscle. So if it develops within the muscle wall of the uterus compared to the lining of the uterus, it's considered a sarcoma. So the term carcinosarcoma is a little bit of a misnomer in that these are actually epithelial tumors. They truly start in the ovary, not in any muscle, but they look like sarcomas. They have features of some sarcomas underneath the microscope. but we tend to treat them more like we would other ovarian cancers and less like sarcomas. But like many women know with rare cancer diagnoses, we have to be very personalized about this in particular. And so there are several clinical trials that are open now for women with either uterine or ovarian carcinosarcomas. And I would urge women, since we can't go through every single trial, on this site, there's a wonderful site on the internet called clinicaltrials.gov. So clinicaltrials.gov is the National Institute of Health. Basically, it's a wonderful database. I refer to this website all the time that gives you the most relevant information about the up and coming trials. And you can type in the type of cancer you have or that a loved one has, and it will show you all the list of trials in the United States that are either open with that particular cancer type or that might be enrolling soon. And one that I want to point to in particular is a trial that's open right now at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute of a drug called a WEE inhibitor, like WEE, having fun. So a WEE inhibitor is actually a silly word, but it's a very important factor in the human cell cycle. It helps regulate our cells to proliferate and grow, and helps serve as a checkpoint during the cell cycle so that excessive proliferation doesn't occur. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Joyce Liu, has been studying this WEE inhibitor, AZD1775, and has a trial right now open for women with carcinosarcomas, I believe of both the uterus and the ovary, because we know that this particular drug worked really well in women with uterine serous carcinoma, which is very similar to the carcinosarcoma. So just wanted to point out that specific study.
That's great. Thank you. And I mean, you pretty much answered this, but we did get another question about carcinosarcoma. And it was specifically, I think, around this confusion of like whether you should be seeing a sarcoma specialist or a gyn-onc. So it seems like everything you're saying, you would still go to a gyn-onc for this.
Yeah, that's right. So a GYN oncologist or a GYN medical oncologist or a combination of both are going to be the physicians that have the most experience with this type of tumor. Great.
And then, so we're getting a bunch of questions in now about clear cell. So this question is, are there any advancements in clear cell ovarian cancer?
Yes, there is a ton. And I just want to point out that in 2018 was deemed by one of the biggest cancer societies in the world, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, was deemed the year of the rare tumor because there were so many trials coming out on rare cancers. And we were very excited that one of our rare tumor trials was noted among the group of the many rare trials. And since then, there's just been an explosion of rare tumor research in clear cell carcinoma and in other types that we're going to talk about today. It's all about, and I'm going to say this sort of repeatedly today, personalizing the treatment based on not only the tumor type, but really the molecular makeup or the genomic makeup of a tumor. And so what I mean by that is, what are the proteins or the genes that may have contributed to the cancer growth that are really important to continued growth of that cancer? And are they proteins or genes that we can target with existing treatments? And those are called actionable mutations, when we can take action against them. And what's really interesting about the clear cell cancers for both ovary and uterine cancers is that about 50% of them have mutations in two very important genes. One of them is ARID1A, which is considered a tumor suppressor protein, and PI3 kinase, which is an important part of one of the central growth pathways, that signal cells to keep proliferating. And we actually have developed, we're working on actionable targets to ARID1A, but there's many potential drugs that can be used for the PI3 kinase tumors. Again, 50% of women with these cancers are going to have this mutation. So there's a lot of trial and activity now looking at PI3 kinase inhibitors, KRAS, and MEK inhibitors in the treatment of this disease, as well as drugs like bevacizumab, which are vascular endothelial growth factor receptor inhibitors, because we know that clear cell tumors are rich in these kinds of receptors. And vascular endothelial growth factor receptors, or VEGF, are basically receptors that accept signals for new blood vessels to form around the tumor. And so in order to grow, a tumor has to keep expanding its blood supply so that it can get nutrients coming to it, right? Well, we don't want that. So these VEGF inhibitors kind of block that blood vessel formation in the tumors. And so that's one nice mechanism to be able to inhibit. And the clear cell tumors can be particularly susceptible to this. The other thing I want to point out, and many of you may be reading a lot about or hearing a lot about immunotherapy. And immunotherapy is one of the most exciting advancements in cancer medicine in decades. And we're seeing that we can now use specifically developed therapies that help excite or activate certain parts of our immune system that we want to be active to recognize tumors as bad and foreign. And clear cell cancers in particular can be very susceptible to immunotherapies. And so for those who may not have as much experience with them and who have clear cell cancers, talk to your physicians about whether an immunotherapy drug or combination might be something that you would be considered for in the future. We're looking at immunotherapies with the combination of those VEGF inhibitors as well. So what's really important is that we get creative here, and sometimes just using one drug only targets a small part of that cancer pathway. But if we can target two different parts of the cancer pathway or two different mechanisms to stop cancer growth, we're sometimes more successful than with just using one drug.
Great. And so we also got a question about clear cell, but particularly recurrent clear cell ovarian cancer. So those treatments you're talking about, would that also be utilized for recurrent clear cell, or are there other options for that?
All of those treatments are used in the setting of recurrence.
Okay.
That I was talking about. We sometimes use the bevacizumab or the VEGF inhibitors in the upfront setting, but still in the upfront setting, we're using a combination of surgery and carboplatin and paclitaxel-based therapies with or without bevacizumab to treat ovarian clear cell cancers.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. So then we also have a question now about what are currently the best treatment options for non-gestational choreocarcinoma?
Boy, that's going to be one of the best questions. Without a great answer, I think, but I'm going to do my best to answer the question. So gestational carcinomas or choreocarcinomas are cancers that can develop in the womb or the uterus after a pregnancy, and that we call them gestational because gestational means pregnant, pregnancy. And they can develop from the placenta, from the lining of the uterus, and they're treated in a very specific way. And the most common type of gestational or pregnancy-related cancer is called choreocarcinoma. I think the question relates to non-gestational choreocarcinomas, which is cancers that didn't develop in pregnancy or in the uterus, but outside of the uterus, that are also similarly called choreocarcinomas and look almost exactly the same under the microscope. And these can be very, very challenging cancers to treat, but we actually think they are they're best treated similar to germ cell tumors of the ovary. And just to kind of take a step back, there's three basic types of ovarian cancer, three categories. There's that epithelial type we talked about, and that's when cancer develops on the external surface of the ovary, or what's called the epithelium, or its covering. That's the most common type of cancer we see, and those are like the serous cancers, the clear cell cancers, that sort of thing, mucinous. Then you have the sex cord stromal tumors that can develop in the cells that produce the hormones, the estrogen and progesterone and other hormones in our ovaries. And then the germ cell tumors are those that develop in the cells in our ovaries that produce the eggs and harbor the eggs and that sort of thing. And so we think that non-gestational choriocarcinoma is more like along the lines of the germ cell tumors, and we treat them accordingly. So we usually use treatments like BEP. We have funny names for all of our treatments, but bleomycin, etoposide, and cisplatin is one of the treatments we use. There's also was a study done in the United Kingdom looking at treatment of gestational and non-gestational choriocarcinoma that looked at regimens like Emico and EMA-EP. And these are just acronyms for 4 and 5 drug regimens that we use to be very aggressive to treat these tumors, because they can be a little more chemo resistant than the non-gestational choriocarcinomas. So we definitely treat them more like the germ cell tumors or the aggressive sort of gestational regimens. The other thing we would do is just check them for molecular markers to see if they have an actionable mutation. So, hey, can we give them immunotherapy, or can we target them with one of these other new drugs that we have to be very specific? So.
Okay, great, thank you. And now we're getting some questions coming in specifically about granulosa cell tumors. And so the first question about that is just around whether there are any new treatment therapies or options for this particular type of tumor.
Yeah, and if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you're going to see some nice trials that are open around the United States, because I don't know where everyone on this call lives. You know, I'm reluctant to give too many specifics, but there's a variety of trials open. What we're finding with the granulosa cell tumors, first of all, for the most part, tend to have a very good prognosis, even though they can recur. Usually remission periods are long, but we either use a combination of chemotherapy, targeted therapies, or hormonal therapies to treat these diseases. And we know that the VEGF inhibitors have a decent amount of activity in these tumors. So the bevacizumab, cediranib, other similar class of agents. I like to use endocrine therapies or hormonal therapies to treat these cancers, but the main treatment for granulosa cell tumor is surgery. So making sure that you are with a GYN oncologist who does these kinds of surgeries and can do a big surgery potentially, because the best treatments for granulosa cell when you are a surgical candidate is to have it removed surgically. Some women aren't going to be surgical candidates, and that's okay. We have other treatment options, and so we can use hormone therapies. I like to use things like tamoxifen, aromatase inhibitors, and those are being really well studied right now in granulosa cell tumors to kind of block the estrogen receptor, because these tumors are very rich in estrogen receptors. And in some cases, you can use carbotaxol or other chemotherapy agents to treat them as well. But we also will send these for molecular testing to identify whether there's a certain mutation we can target.
That last comment you made actually ties really well into the other question about granulosa cell tumors, which is around how many actionable mutations have been found in this particular type of tumor.
Yeah, that's a great question. So only a couple, but there are some actionable targets, not as many as in some of the higher grade tumors. These tend to be slower growing, lower grade tumors, but the most important target I think is fabulous is, again, this estrogen receptor, because we have, through all the breast cancer trials that we have, which is the other site, like the ovary, the uterus, and breast are the 3 sites that are most likely to express estrogen receptors. We can kind of piggyback off of and benefit from all of the data in breast cancer and on. There's been a ton of anti-estrogens and anti-progesterones developed over the years, initially to treat breast cancer, but we're finding they're very helpful to treat our tumors as well, including granulosa cell.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move back to ovarian carcinosarcoma. This person mentions that they're on maintenance for Avastin and is asking, have there been any studies about the effectiveness of this?
Yeah, so good question. So historically, ovarian carcinosarcoma patients have not been included in the larger trials with other epithelial ovarian cancer survivors. I don't think it's right, but that's just kind of historically what's been the case. So we're sort of extrapolating more from the other high-grade serous and other tumor types that are in the ovary. But there is some retrospective data suggesting decent activity here in these trials, and there are other VEGF inhibitors currently being studied in clinical trials in this tumor type. So there's a lot of rationale, I think, for trying to use drugs like bevacizumab in this situation.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now we're going to jump over to some questions we received about Dysterminoma.
Okay.
So, well, one question is, when should chemotherapy be used for Dysterminoma?
Great question. So Dysterminoma is an example of that germ cell tumor that we talked about. The most common malignant or cancerous germ cell tumor that we usually see, and it usually, in most cases, occurs in reproductive age women. So early stage Dysterminomas we just treat with surgery. Stage really 1C through 4, which means that it has started to spread outside of the ovary, we tend to add chemotherapy there, and usually a combination of either etoposide and carboplatin or that BEP regimen we talked about before. And usually we give 3 to 4 cycles of that. The good news is Dysterminomas overall have an excellent prognosis long-term, one of the best of all the ovarian cancers. And so, so even if it does come back, like if you had early stage disease, if you had a stage like 1A disease, you would not get chemotherapy upfront for that. Let's say it came back late at a later date. The good news is that we usually use a combination of surgery and chemotherapy to treat with an excellent prognosis overall. And so, and if you can't have surgery because there's disease in spots that can't be operated on, that's okay, because these tumors, for the most part, are really chemosensitive, and they usually respond quite well to chemotherapy.
And then what are the options for those with Dysterminoma who, I mean, you mentioned that the prognosis is typically good, but when it does metastasize, what are the options for treatment then?
Again, usually surgery when possible. And with going to see a GYN oncologist, you're going to have a surgeon who has a lot of experience with doing what we call multi-organ surgery. So for example, if disease has gone to the other organs like the colon or the spleen or the diaphragm or something like that, have a surgical team that will potentially be able to remove that. And then, you know, chemotherapy again, the BEP or the etoposide platinum or platinum containing regimen. And these tumors have been fairly well studied in that regard, with an excellent response to the platinum or the cisplatin or carboplatin containing regimens. So,
okay, great, thank you. So now this question is about, well, there's 2 questions about it. It's about SCCT and if there are any current clinical trials for that, and also how is SCTAT treated?
Yeah, so these are sex cord stromal tubule tumors with annular tubules. It's a mouthful.
I know, I like that they have the acronym for that.
The acronyms, we love acronyms. Yeah. So yeah, so also generally associated with a very good prognosis for these cancers. They're similar to granulosa cell tumors. They're much rarer. And granulosa cell tumors are already rare. We can see this with women who have Poitz-Jaeger syndrome, or even those who don't have that syndrome. But we generally treat them with surgery. Surgery is the mainstay of treatment for these tumors, and usually women do very well with surgery alone. There's very few studies in the literature looking at chemotherapies and those options, but we would normally treat them with a similar regimen that we would use for a sex cord stromal tumor. So platinum, again, we use a lot of carboplatin to treat these, but in most cases we use surgery or try to molecularly target the tumor, send them off for molecular testing to see if there's a target. But women often do well with just surgery alone with these tumors.
Great. And then, so now I'm going to jump over to low-grade serous ovarian cancer. This question is asking, what is the significance of the KRAS mutation in regards to low-grade?
So the KRAS mutation is, KRAS is an oncogene, and it's basically part of a growth factor or growth pathway in the cell that signals it to proliferate or divide and grow. And KRAS, what was the tumor type? Low-grade serous?
Yeah.
Okay. KRAS is actually important in many different gynecologic tumors, but yeah, in low-grade, we see it in about, we see these mutations in about 30 to 40% of cases. And we can actually target them with specific drugs. And some of those drugs are called MEK inhibitors. KRAS is part of a pathway called the MEK and MAP kinase pathway. And so MEK is along that pathway, and a MEK inhibitor kind of provides blockade so that that signal doesn't reach the nucleus of the cell where the DNA is, and hopefully doesn't grow or proliferate. And the MEK inhibitors have been studied in several randomized controlled trials in low-grade serous in the recurrent setting, in women with recurrent disease, and found to have, in a trial called GOG281, which was an NCI trial, found to have good activity. And these are drugs that are called like trametinib or benimetinib. Again, difficult drugs to say. They don't roll off the tongue. And in the see, I can't even say it, and I say this all the time.
That makes me feel better.
The benimetinib trial, that study actually showed that in particular women with the KRAS mutations had a better response to the MEK inhibitor than those who didn't have the KRAS mutations. But interestingly, in the GOG281 trial, which kind of was a very similar study where they basically looked at the MEK inhibitor by itself versus physician's choice or patient and physician choice chemotherapy, and they had a variety of drugs they could choose from. All women, whether they had the KRAS mutation or not, did well with the MEK inhibitor, or did a little better with the MEK inhibitor. So one study has shown improvement with the KRAS mutation. The other study, we still don't know. We're still waiting on data there, but it didn't necessarily show that. So it's nice that it's a targetable mutation potentially, and it's a very important mutation in the low-grade serous pathways.
And then continuing on with low-grade serous, this question is asking, are there any tests or markers that indicate if someone is more likely or not to respond positively to chemo for low-grade serous ovarian cancer? You know,
that is a really great question that I don't yet have a good answer. If I do this Q&A again, maybe next year I'll have a better answer for you, because we're actually looking at this question. We're so focused on what are responders to molecular targets in low grade that I think it's an excellent question, because only about 25% of women respond well to conventional chemotherapy with low grade. So identifying who those women are is a really, really important unanswered concern. There are molecular markers. One of the things we postulate or we think is that in women who have P53 mutations in the low-grade tumors, which are very, very rare, those women may have features of both high-grade and low-grade serous cancers, and they may benefit the most from chemo. This is very speculative, so please don't quote me on this, but we're kind of studying this right now to see do exactly what you say, like how do you identify? And so we're looking at the molecular level to see if we can identify, and we're going back in time and looking at women who've been treated with chemo and without, and who did well and who didn't, and then trying to study their tumors to kind of figure out what are the differences here. So please stay tuned on that.
Great. And then, okay, now I'm going to go back to ovarian carcinosarcoma. because it looks like there's some interest in this particular question. But it's just asking about immunotherapy and whether that's been shown to be at all effective with that type of ovarian cancer.
Well, we don't know, but what's important to remember, you know, with rare cancers, we've said for many years, like, we want to be splitters and not lumpers. And what I mean by that is, instead of lumping all women into the same ovarian cancer trials and giving them one treatment, which does not fit a one size fits all strategy, of course, because all these tumors that women are diagnosed with are so different. Like, let's split out the rare tumors and study each woman with each type of tumor separately. The problem with that strategy, though, that we're finding is that there's only so much bandwidth to do clinical trials, and there's not that many patients around the world to necessarily inform a clinical trial that in women with rare tumors, which really stinks, right? Because we need answers and we need good data to support the recommendations we make to all of you. So what we're actually looking at now is kind of looking at trials that are called umbrella or platform studies. An umbrella trial it basically involves, you're looking at maybe one drug or class of drugs, but you're looking at them in many different tumor types, but you're studying each cohort separately, if you will. So they're all going under the same umbrella, but they're not being lumped together as part of the overall group, so that you can really see, okay, women with clear cell are behaving like this with this drug, and women with carcinosarcoma, have this response rate. Platform studies also allow us to look at many different drugs depending on the type of mutation a woman has, and or it can be men too. And so there's actually a great study that you may have heard of, the National Cancer Institute MATCH trial, which basically you do genetic testing or molecular testing on a tumor, and if you have one of a number of different mutations and actionable drugs that are being studied in this trial, you can enroll in this trial. It doesn't matter what tumor type you have. So what we're actually learning more and more of with the rare tumor research we're doing is the type of cancer is starting to matter less, but the molecular targets are starting to be more and more emphasized. And we're kind of trying to put both histology, which means type of cancer, with molecular targets together to get the best possible results. So that's a long-winded answer to say that immunotherapy may not have been studied as specifically in a large trial for just women with ovarian carcinosarcomas, but we know that if you have certain molecular targets in your tumors, and that can include what's called microsatellite instability or mismatch repair deficiency, we call that MMR, then you're going to be potentially a great responder to immunotherapy, or at least have a decent shot at responding to immunotherapy. If you don't have that tumor type, don't fear, that molecular pattern, don't fear, because you can also combine immunotherapy with, again, those VEGF inhibitors in patients with ovarian carcinosarcoma and other similar tumors, and potentially get a response there. So I hope I answered your question. But I just want to say, don't worry that, well, I don't want to tell you not to worry, but don't fret that if there isn't a particular trial open for your specific tumor type, there are a number of trials opening now looking at lots of different tumor types together under umbrellas. And it's a matter of talking to your physician to find, okay, where can I go based on my molecular profile? Is there a trial that fits my profile? And many women with rare tumors are now finding much more trial options are available to them because of that. So
great. I think that was a lot of information. Thank you. So this person is bringing up primary peritoneal cancer, which is treated similarly to ovarian cancer. So just whether there's anything you can speak to about that in terms of new treatments or any clinical trials. I believe primary peritoneal can be included in ovarian cancer clinical trials, correct?
Yes, and almost every one includes primary peritoneal because they behave they look identical under the microscope, they behave similarly, and they respond to the same types of drugs. So yes, I mean, I could talk for 2 hours about this alone, but I won't. I'll try to keep my answers shorter. Yes, there's a number of options available for women with primary peritoneal cancers. I'm going to just cut to say, I'm assuming you mean the recurrent setting, but PARP inhibitors are the big story right now. One of the biggest stories in ovarian cancer research. It appears that all women may benefit from PARP inhibitors at some point in their treatment trajectory, but women, especially who have BRCA mutations, and those are genes that can give you a genetic susceptibility or inherited susceptibility to develop ovarian or peritoneal cancers. And even if you don't have the gene in your family, we also are testing the tumors for BRCA. So the tumor can have BRCA mutation, but the rest of your cells in the body don't have BRCA. And even if your tumor has the BRCA, they respond well to PARP inhibitors as well. We are additionally testing women for what's called homologous recombination defects, or HRD, which also makes one susceptible to PARP inhibitors. And PARP inhibitors are really important. PARPs are proteins that help, again, with cell cycle regulation and proliferation. It's a common theme here. We're targeting that DNA and proliferation cycle. If we can block that, we can potentially help delay or block, cell cycle regeneration and growth of the cells and into tumors. So that's one of the most exciting stories right now happening in ovarian cancer. We're also looking at immunotherapy with other molecular targets in ovarian and peritoneal cancers now. Immunotherapy by itself, just one immunotherapy drug, has not had a lot of traction in ovarian cancer in general. It's when we combine it with what we call dual inhibition with immunotherapies or other molecular targeted therapies that we're seeing a bit better success there.
And then just another question on primary peritoneal cancer is, if there is a family history of it, like someone's mother has had it, is there anything that they should be doing proactively? I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah. So a family member has had primary peritoneal cancer. So great question. So any family member, so even if you don't have a family history of ovarian or peritoneal cancer, if you've been diagnosed with ovarian or peritoneal cancer, the current national recommendation is that you should undergo genetic testing because we're finding that up to 25% of ovarian and peritoneal cancers are inherited. Even if you don't have a quote unquote, knowledgeable family history about it, we're picking up another 10 to 15% of cases through genetic testing. And that's why we're recommending universal testing for everyone. What are some of the reasons why? Well, can it skip generations? Sure, because these genes don't usually incur a 100% risk of developing the cancer. That's usually a percentile risk. So with like BRCA1, it's up to a 40-45% risk. With BRCA2, up to a 25% risk. So some women with the gene won't develop the cancer. But the other reason is that women from our mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers generations had hysterectomy and ovaries removed at younger ages, much more so than we're doing now. Hysterectomy rates are on the decline now compared to 1 or 2 or 3 generations ago. And so sometimes women don't know that they have that risk because their mothers had their ovaries removed for a different reason and didn't know it. And so we have to correct for that, what we call that hysterectomy factor to make sure that, so knowledge of your family history is super important. Now, if you have a family member, like a grandma who had peritoneal cancer and no one else in the family had it and your grandma has passed away and unable to do genetic testing, it's very reasonable to talk to your physician about getting genetic testing to see if you're going to be at risk. And if you do have a gene, then undergoing surveillance or finding out what strategies you can do to reduce your risk, including surgical options, is really important to talk to your doctor about.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now, Okay, this is just should be just a quick question, but so people are already searching on clinicaltrials.gov. So this person said that they did a search for ovarian carcinosarcoma and WEE1 inhibitor, and it came up with no studies. What should they be looking for?
Oh, just put in ovarian carcinosarcoma, and the study will come right up. Don't put in WEE1 inhibitor.
Okay, great. Yeah, people are already looking.
That's awesome. Yeah, so if you just put the disease type, the fewer specifics you put, the longer your list, and it won't exclude any of those studies. So, and it'll hopefully be one of the first studies that comes up. But the name of that WEE1 inhibitor, just it's a experimental drug called AZD1775.
Great. Okay, now going back to low grade, this question is, what is the best way to watch/check for recurrence in low grade, which typically doesn't show up on scans?
Well, actually it does show up on scans very well.
Okay.
In my experience taking care of many women with this disease, if it's not showing up on a scan, but the CA125 is going up, so we really surveil it the same way we do high grade ovarian cancers. We use CA125 if it was elevated as a tumor marker to follow women, and then, you know, depending on if it was very early stage disease, I don't necessarily get a lot of CT scans. I just use CA125. If it was more advanced or recurrent disease, I use a combination of CT scans or PET scans and CA125. PET scans sometimes don't light up. Maybe that's one thing they're referring to, because they're not super fast growing tumors for the most part. Sometimes they can become rapidly growing and transform some. But so I tend to use CT instead of PET scan. But no, they definitely show up on CT. And if they're not showing up on CT, that's awesome. And it may mean that, you know, it's not clinically going to cause harm at that point. But I'll usually, depending on whether it's advanced or recurrent, check CTs every 6 months or so on my patients, and CA125s every 3 months.
And then also about low grade, we got some questions about what are the latest treatment options. And then they're also asking, how effective is anastrozole as a maintenance drug?
Anastrozole?
Anastrozole.
Okay. What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
What are the latest treatment options for low-grade serous?
Great. Okay. So let's talk about the second part of the question first, really quickly. So anastrozole is an example of an aromatase inhibitor. These are drugs that help block estrogen production in the body, and these, just like granulosa cell tumors and endometrioid tumors, low-grade serous are rich usually in estrogen receptors. And so blocking those estrogen pathways may be important. A lot of the research I do on low-grade at my institution at Johns Hopkins is looking at those estrogen pathways and how we can block them. And we've had some success with, you know, sometimes with treating patients with just aromatase inhibitors alone. Sometimes we combine them as maintenance drugs after chemotherapy. And so there was a study at MD Anderson that showed if you're newly diagnosed with low-grade disease, you get surgery and then go on chemo, and then you get maintenance anastrozole. And what maintenance means is, like, you're put on a drug that you take a pill every day, once a day, and just kind of continue on it a couple years to several years. It can be continued indefinitely. And we just see how you're doing. And it appears that adding that anastrozole is super important, that women do much better with that added than when it's not added, because we can block not only the DNA through the chemo, but the endocrine pathways or the estrogen through the anastrozole. At Johns Hopkins, I, for several years, was not even giving chemo for these women that I treated. I would just give them the aromatase inhibitor, like the letrozole or anastrozole afterward, and we had some good results there. So actually right now we have a randomized controlled trial open. It's international, where we're comparing chemo followed by maintenance aromatase inhibitor versus aromatase inhibitor by itself with no chemo after surgery for women who have stage 2 through 4 low-grade serous, to help answer the question of, is chemo and AI and aromatase inhibitor important, or can you just do the aromatase inhibitor by itself? In the recurrent setting, we're very actively studying at MD Anderson, Hopkins, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Dana-Farber, lots of places around the country and world, lots of new molecular targets. We talked about the MEK inhibitors already, like trametinib, selumetinib. We've talked about, so bevacizumab, those vascular endothelial growth factor receptors have decent activity in these tumors as well, because they're rich in the VEGF receptors. We are looking at a variety of endocrine therapies, including not only the aromatase inhibitors, but things like exemestane and fulvestrant. But are other ways we can block estrogen, and they've been really well studied in breast cancer. Tamoxifen is being studied as well. And we're looking at the combination, like if one becomes resistant to these drugs, we can do a molecular test to determine if one may be resistant to some of these drugs. It's called ESR1. And then we can sometimes continue using those drugs, but add another drug to it, which has been studied in breast cancer, drugs called CDK4/6 inhibitors, one example being palbociclib. So we're looking at all different sorts of combinations right now in low-grade serous, as well as chemo combinations, to see, how can we continue to expand survival outcomes for women who have recurrent disease. And surgery, let me say, remains the single most important, I think, factor in treatment for this disease, because it's so slow growing. So really exploring whether one is a candidate for aggressive surgical treatment is probably one of the best things we can do to expand survival in this population of women.
Great. And then lots of questions to look through. Let's see.
I really appreciate it.
Well, we really appreciate having you here to answer all these questions. So thank you again. Okay, so this question, I think, is just sort of asking why chemo isn't typically effective for low-grade serous. I think that's what they're asking.
That's an excellent question. I've spent a lot of my career sort of studying that question. So I will clarify again that about 25 to 30% of women will have some response to chemotherapy with low grade, but that wonderful question before about figuring out who those women are going to be is really important, and we're working on that. But a lot of women won't respond well. And one of the reasons for that is chemotherapy, most chemotherapies target their DNA replication. The DNA is where our genes are, right? The genetic makeup of our beings are in every cell of our body, and it's in the nucleus, or the inner part of our cells. And most chemotherapy targets proteins that help with replication of the DNA, and you have to successfully replicate DNA double helix in order for a cell to divide and form more and more cells. So if you can disrupt that process, you're potentially in good shape with stopping cell cycle growth. But chemotherapy agents also directly target DNA. So you can form like toxic chemicals that, glom onto the DNA to keep it from replicating as well. And chemo, as a general matter, is going to work much better in tumors that rapidly divide, that are in a constant state of DNA replication. Because if you have a cell that's not in a process of dividing its DNA, it's really slow growing, and most of the time it's in called G0 state, where it's just kind of hanging out but not replicating. No amount of chemotherapy is necessarily going to, it might kill off a few of those cells, but they're kind of protecting themselves, right, against that by not being an active replication. And so chemo really works best on rapidly dividing cells. So higher grade serous cancers are much more likely to respond to chemo than low grade, which are slow growing, and their DNA replicates maybe 4 or 5 times less frequently than the high grade. So you'll find that with a lot of these tumors that are slower growing, although people always say, oh, well, women with low grade have better survival outcomes because they have, longer remissions and their tumors aren't growing as quickly. Well, where I say we got to be careful with that is that, yeah, but you have a ton of treatment options for high grade serous. And so we're really, really actively working on, when women do recur with low grade, getting them great treatments that actually work well for their tumor types. And now there's more and more treatments available so that we can say, yeah, survival is getting longer, and we can help women live with better quality and length of life.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm sort of going to a general question, because I think some people may have some confusion, but just how do you know if you have a rare type of ovarian cancer? Just if you could speak to that.
So you are asking really provocative questions. They're very challenging to me, which is great. These are exactly the kind of things we should be talking about. I would argue that all ovarian cancers are rare. Mm-hmm. And I mean, when you compare, so about 25 to 30,000 women a year in the United States are diagnosed with a new ovarian cancer, compared to breast cancer with 200,000 cases a year. Tenfold different. That's mm-hmm. rare. But there's rare of the rare subtypes of that. Mm-hmm. And so high-grade serous carcinoma is really the most common of the ovarian cancers. So what we call your more garden variety ovarian cancers. Nothing gardenly about it, though. Everyone is unique, and we have to be very personalized in how we treat those as well. But the rare tumors tend to be this germ cell tumors, the sex cord stromal tumors, and then of the epithelial subtypes, all the other subtypes that are not high-grade serous. So low-grade serous, clear cell, mucinous, endometrioid, and Brenner tumors are considered rare.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that clarification. And then I think there's also some maybe confusion around the typical markers like CA-125, and are those used across all ovarian cancers? Is that a good indication, or is it depend on the type of ovarian cancer?
It's another excellent question. It depends on the type of ovarian cancer. So for high-grade and low-grade serous cancers, for clear cell cancers, and for most endometrioid cancers, CA-125 is going to be your best tumor marker. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, for mucinous cancers, CEA is CA-125 can also be used if it's elevated at the time of diagnosis, but CEA is also a great marker. That's called carcinoembryonic antigen. This is the tumor marker most elevated in colon cancers and gastric cancers, and the cell type in mucinous cancers of the ovary are similar to colon cancers, so that CEA also goes up. So you can look at CEA or CA-125 there. And then the germ cell and the sex cord stromal tumors have usually their own, types. So Dysterminoma is lactate dehydrogenase, or LDH. We look at inhibin B or A levels with granulosa cell tumors. So it's very specific depending on the type of tumor you have. And it's important to remember, if that tumor marker wasn't elevated at diagnosis, so you had a cancer, but the tumor marker wasn't recognizing it, it may or may not be a good marker to follow, because you want to know that it's accurately representing that there was cancer there at the beginning, at the diagnosis. And so in those cases, it's a little trickier. I still might use the tumor marker, but I counsel women that may or may not be as useful. So we use CT scans and imaging and more in those cases.
Okay, that's really helpful, because there were a lot of different questions around that type of thing. So let's see. I just want to, let everyone know we only have a couple more minutes. So I'm going to try to get through one or two more questions, but then we're going to have to wrap up. So, and then this question is really about sort of in what rare ovarian cancers are PARP inhibitors a potential option?
Which ovarian cancers?
Yeah.
There's a couple studies that have shown that all women may benefit at some point from a PARP inhibitor. The question is degree of response. And so women who have either a BRCA or other genetic, mutation, but specifically BRCA mutations that are inherited, or BRCA mutations in their tumors, or that HRD, homologous recombination defects in their tumors. Those are the 3 types of tumors that if women have, will have the best response to PARP inhibitors. But even if a woman doesn't have those, there are a couple of trials that have shown that in both the upfront and recurrent setting, that there may be value and extension of remission-free, or what we call progression-free survival time on drug, where you're not progressing, your cancer is not continuing to grow. It may not have completely vanished, but it's stable. And that can be a win when you've had many different treatment options. Just getting the disease to stop growing and with as few side effects as possible is sometimes a goal. So you should talk to your doctors about whether a PARP inhibitor is the right choice for you based on your tumor type. And if your tumor hasn't been tested, and forgive me, PARP inhibitors have only been studied thus far in the epithelial tumors, not in germ cell or sex cord stromal tumors, though there may be value there too. Just haven't studied it well yet, but the high-grade serous tumors, high-grade serous is really the tumor type where this has been best studied, but any epithelial tumor type, we should be checking for these things.
Great. And I think I'm looking at the time, I think we only have enough time for one more question. And this is one that I thought would sort of be good to wrap everything up. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of questions about clinical trials and, knowing what works in these rarer types of ovarian cancers. Clinical trials are really important. So how can participation in clinical trials be made more feasible for those with rarer types of ovarian cancer to ensure we're moving the needle?
Yeah, that's a question I ask myself all the time. And I applaud you all for the incredibly intelligent and thoughtful questions today. And please note, your providers, our scientists, we're thinking very deeply about these questions. We have really exciting advances happening. It's never enough, and I will say that, but there's a lot of exciting advances happening in ovarian rare tumors, and more than ever before. And so it's an honor to be part, to be a scientist and a physician at this time to help care for women, because I finally feel like we're developing treatments and we can tell women some good news about, hey, we actually have something that can target your specific tumor. And so, but how to make sure that women in rural settings or in community settings have access to these drugs and these state-of-the-art advances is really important. We're not doing a good enough job with that. And so really educating yourselves is the single most important thing you can do, and making sure that you're going to a GYN oncologist or a GYN medical oncologist who has specific experience with rare tumors or with gynecologic cancers in general is also one of the single most important things you can do, because most gynecologic cancer specialists are really tapped in to these studies. And even though I'm at Hopkins, which has a lot of great trials, I have no qualms, and I have extreme humility about sending a patient to another center if they have a better trial for my patient. I've sent patients to Penn, to Memorial Sloan Kettering, to Anderson, to University of Virginia, centers all around me. If a patient is able to travel, we give them the options and get them to the best place. And I think a good physician or team will help facilitate that. But look at clinicaltrials.gov, read as much as you can to educate yourselves. And hopefully as physicians, we will keep you updated. And know that enrolling in clinical trials is associated with a survival advantage, because we can offer you the next best thing that we think is going to have an impact before we can offer it to the general public. And so women who are treated at centers where clinical trials are offered have those many more treatment options available to them. So I would just say, just make sure if you're not at one of those types of centers, it's okay, but just talk to your physician about how you might be considered for a trial if that's going to be an option for you. So
thank you so much for that. And thank you again for being here today and answering all these questions. We really appreciate it. And, you know, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions today. I know there's so much to talk about on this topic, but hopefully we'll be able to do another program like this in the future. Thank you to all of you for submitting these great questions that we were able to ask Dr. Fader today. We ask that you please take a moment to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. The survey will show up in the browser when the webinar ends, and the link will also be sent in a follow-up email afterwards. So thank you again, Dr. Fader, and thank you to all of you for participating today.
Thank you so much. A wonderful